Hi there. I've been working on the Bartershare website and it is almost ready. It was working since 2007, but I basically abandoned the project for a few years because I thought it wasn't really necessary. What it allows you to do is to create an economy that you do that with a group of people that are all online, and then you can start bartering things. You have to define what types of things you can barter. So you have to make a list of types of items that you can generate. But then anybody that has one of these items, so that can be an apple or a bottle of wine, or it can be an hour of, I don't know, manicure. Everybody can generate shares, and these shares can be traded then online between people. It's not really geographically limited, so it can also be a number of companies that work around the US that simply have raw materials that they want to exchange or parts, and they want to put that in the Bartershare site, and they can exchange one part for another or a number of parts for another, because you can both emit a number of shares and you can emit shares that are fractional, so you can break a bottle in 4 parts and then and people can trade that with each other. Check it out. If you are a group of people and you want to do this, you're an intentional community, or you're some kind of group that is a little bit into the whole agora-centric, small town, real economy type system, then you're welcome, and I will help you set up this system and try to see if it works well. I believe it has to. It also has it has a metals bank, so you can also use gold and silver. You can create a secret store, a safe somewhere, and then the people in the group that are members of the economy that you're talking about can exchange milligrams of these metals. And of course you can only pick up the metals if you have a complete bar, so for an ounce of silver you need 300 and something milligrams. But then you can pick up the bar, and that's the way it works. And it has all kinds of features that I all made up 2 years ago, but it's a little bit complicated to explain, and for some reason it's incredibly tedious for me to upload the pictures and write the story. I'm completely flabbergasted why I'm not. It's something I just don't like to do, I guess. Talk about and it can completely replace money, and the nice thing about it is always exactly the amount of money in the economy that is necessary for the exchange of the goods and the services, because they represent one-in-one the goods and the services, just like non-fractional original banking. And talking about original banking and of course gold and silver, there's great news. Let's go dancing in the street. Max Kaiser has a coin with his image on it. I think it's probably not the best feature about it. Sorry, Max, but he made some good choices. He apparently there's some coinage firm that makes 1/10 of an ounce of silver, and so even if gold goes to $500 by the end of this year, which I don't hope, because it doesn't mean that he can sell these bigger coins that he has. But then he still has a denomination that's useful, because you have a $50 coin, that's your 3 gram coin. And maybe you don't agree with me, but it's interesting to me. Silver will really appreciate in value, so it will really increase in value. It will not reflect inflation. It will reflect increased scarcity that's recognized. I heard Bob Chapman say something that I think is complete nonsense, and that kind of more or less convinces me that the long-term bullion, let's say, gurus, of which Max is not one, I think, but Lyndon Larouche and Bob Chapman, and they're a little bit scared of losing their business, because if there's a new gold standard, then who cares if somebody says there's going to be a gold standard? So he's saying things that are actually slightly depressing the interest in it. So, and he said something ridiculous, I think, because he said We're actually on a gold standard right now, because if you go to the bullion dealer, you can get your gold for your dollars. Yeah, that is if a very slight amount of people do that. Of course, that's not what a gold standard means. It means two things, of course. One is that there's a law that says that you always have to receive gold or silver for your paper currency. But if that's not even the case, but something else would be true, namely, whenever anybody goes to a bank, they can get their gold. That is basically resilient to a bank run. Then you have a gold standard. And it's all an illusion. So as long as the banks can maintain the illusion that they are resilient to a bank run, then you have a gold standard. And that's actually what's going on, of course. JP Morgan maintains successfully until now the illusion that he can resist a bank run on metals. But there is an actual bank run ongoing at the moment, and they're not coping very well. That's why the price is going up. And that's the whole issue. That's the whole issue that Bob Chapman is now denying, that there's a real issue there. If even a slightly significant amount of Americans tries to buy bullion, as it's now the case, it runs out. So he's talking claptrap BS. There's another guy, Lyndon Larouche, that I think is very funny, because he's sitting around the table with some old guys, and then he just links a lot of memes and historic facts that might be true. He just regurgitates history, which is entertaining. That's just like watching television for a long time. Somebody can be very entertaining to listen to. But it doesn't make much sense to me what he's saying. Because what he is saying is that, let's say the dollar system collapses. Then you have, he says, then basically the US has to, of course, create a new federal currency and put people to work on large infrastructure projects that will then bring on the new economy. Well, and I believe he talks about oil every now and then too, so I don't think he's that clueless. But of course that won't work, because my theory is that the oil Federal Reserve System is explicitly created to deal with, and let's say the non-dollar standard, non-gold standard dollar is explicitly there as a petrodollar system. So as long as dollars are created, oil can flow to the US. And the problem we have right now is that there are different people vying for the oil, and there are different people that have more to offer to the oil countries than the US, so that petrodollar system is collapsing. Apart from the fact that the oil is running out. And that has lots of implications, because if that really happens, so if Saudi Arabia really starts selling oil in the yuan, not in the yuan, but in the yuan, to Mexico in the yuan, but and in the Jesus, then there's no way back to that. There's no way for US to recapture that supply. Then the dollar is collapsed and gone, and the oil is not flowing towards the US anymore. It's going to go in other directions. So it's an unstable balance, and if it falls apart, then it stays on the ground, and you don't know really what's going to happen to it. So this new federal currency that Lyndon Larouche talks about cannot be used for large infrastructure projects, because you cannot move things around, because you don't have fuel to do that. Enough, at least, you don't have enough. And there will be a huge calamity, of course, because food production collapses, which it will do anyway, because the predictions of the World Food Organization, or whatever that agency is called, are counting on oil that isn't there. So they're counting on, I talked about in another video, they're counting on a steady supply of oil, a plateau. It's not going to be a plateau. Everybody knows that. So what will happen, I think, is much more interesting, and that is that the energy companies will become very important. And then there's two scenarios. I have to talk faster because my battery is almost dead. But two scenarios. One is that the energy companies remain private and connected to the outside of US and can supply the US with some kind of energy, coal and stuff like that, but autonomously from the government. And they become the government. And if they build from that in terms of alternative sources of energy, then they basically are in control of everything. They're in control of the food supply, they're in control of anything. There's some productive capacity in the US. Of course, it's not likely that they will remain independent, so they will probably be nationalized, energy companies, and they will be put to work for the essential energy supply and for the food production initially, and then later for general use of energy and productive capacity. But of course, that's after a big famine in which people have nothing to eat. And then it will be obvious that the way to wealth is to create more sources of energy so less people have to do hard labor and work. The best final design of society, I think, is the one that I talked about, which is the agoracentric model, is where you have small communities or relatively small communities that are autonomous in every aspect, including energy. So they don't need anything from outside. But they can still be connected by roads, of course, but also by internet and by the media. So it actually will be a pretty appealing thing to have a number of small communities that are aware of each other, that you can have celebrities in. But it's simply because the oil is run out, you cannot have the open structure, for instance, of LA. It's just undoable. Big cities like New York, I'm not sure, that might come back, because it was there before there was huge amounts of oil. And of course, I'm actually involved in a project in the Philippines where I might move, which is cool, just initially. But it's about making biofuels using algae, seaweed. And if that comes off the ground, then it has two effects. One is it can actually save the oceans from dying, and it can provide enormous amounts of fuel and food and fertilizer for the world to use. So hopefully that happens, and I'm going to work for that. But thanks for listening, and if you're interested in Bartershares, then super, and let me know. And if you simply want to support me, go to my website and follow the links and click on some ads or donate some money. I can use it. Thanks.